Happy August, friends. Oh my goodness. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it's August 2nd. Where did the summer go? It was jam-packed. And now this is fall. This is fall for us here in the Midwest in the U.S. This is fall and our kids start school in just a few days. And I was kind of stuck on what to talk about today because I have batched all summer and now batched my episodes, and now it's a clean slate. I have a clean slate. We're getting ready, gearing up for fall, gearing up for all the activities, which I know I need to address and talk about that. But I was thinking about, should I talk about school starting and fall, or is that just us? We start school, in a few days, but I know that's not countrywide and that's not even worldwide for that matter. I have listeners all over the world. So come tell me in the Facebook group, please, when does your fall begin? When does the start of school start for you and your kids? You can come tell me at bit.ly/holistic hacks, or the Facebook group is titled Holistic Living for Christian Moms. I would love to know because it is a big season for many reasons. And I want to speak to the time-sensitive, relatable topics for you that you want to hear. So come tell me when this starts for you. Instead of guessing, today I decided to have a topic that anyone can relate to in any season. I have a guest on the show today to talk the basics of homesteading. And even if you're not interested in that and you just cringed, do you want to know some simple ways to quiet your soul, or to hear God's voice, or just to be more intentional with your time? I know you do, or you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. So our guest today will share with you what she does to accomplish those things. Jocelyn Jennings is a fifth-generation homestead wife and mom of two with a mission to encourage women to lead healthy, productive, Christ-centered lives for their families through homesteading and learning to be more self-reliant. Jocelyn believes that anyone can start homesteading and do it God's way to experience less stress, more joy, while leading a more simple, natural life. In her podcast, The Farm Family Table, she offers biblical encouragement, resources for building knowledge and homesteading skills like cooking from scratch, gardening, and food preservation, and practical tips for faith-based family life. I really think you're going to love this conversation today. Let's get into it. Mama, you didn't know you could yell at your precious 2-year-old. You feel so guilty and like you're doing the worst job at mothering. You feel like you're failing, and you're failing your kids and yourself and your spouse, and you just aren't a good enough mom. You also feel that if you just had a little more time, a little more patience, a little more energy, and a lot more sleep, you would be better. I know this because this was me not that long ago. I felt I should be a better mom because my kids only get one. It's me. But there was so much pressure from the culture around me to do better, to be better, and in myself. And this pressure kept building to the point where I almost snapped. I need you to hear me that these are lies the enemy wants you to believe. But until you pull up the roots of these lies, they will continue to be what you operate under, and you will continue to feel this way. I want you to live and walk and mother in God's truth. Surviving by treading water and being exhausted all the time isn't how motherhood is supposed to be. The gift of a child or children is your time to thrive and shine. If you are saying yes and amen to that, won't you join me in this life-changing step? I want you to go right now to theshanwright.com. theshanwright.com. We are going to do this together. I'm going to hold your hand and we're going to overcome these lies, dig up roots, and plant beautiful flowers of truth that have strong roots. You are going to blossom into a beautiful, vibrant mother. You ready? Let's go. Hey mama, are you stressed by the lack of time in the day to do all the things? Are you feeling disconnected from God, your husband, and even your kids because patience and presence seem out of reach? Do you want a healthier body, mind, spirit, and home, but overwhelmed in where to start? Hey, I'm Shan Wright, daughter of the king, wife, mom to 4, RN, wellness coach, and I know very well what it feels like to want to live well, but about to lose it with my very blessed, full life. After realizing I can't pour from an empty cup, I tracked my way to whole body wellness and so much peace. If you are ready to cancel the stressed out life, learn tactical, intentional strategies as a mom wearing many hats, find more peace, confidence, and joy raising kingdom kids, then listen in. Come on, mama, together we got this. Really, God's got this. So go heat up that coffee again and turn your listening ears on. Let's chat. Super excited because we're going to get into all things homesteading today. So please help me welcome Jocelyn to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, I am so excited that we're going to have this conversation. We have not yet talked about homesteading on the show yet. And I love that you focus on the basics and the simple things and how to get started. That's super important to us over here at Holistic Moms. So please just share with us a little bit more about you, your testimony, just wherever you want to start, however far back you want to start as to where you started, and then where you are today. Why are you podcasting and whatever else you do? And just share a little bit with us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I want to start with sharing kind of how I got into homesteading and how that kind of ties together with my story. But first, again, I'm Jocelyn. I am a stay-at-home mom to 2 little girls, ages 1 and 3. So I'm definitely in the thick of those crazy toddler years. And I know how hard and how busy they are. And my husband and I live in North Dakota, where we farm commercially as we have our homestead. So our farm is actually an original homestead, which means my husband's great great grandfather established the homestead. And that's kind of our history of, how our family has had the land and all that. But what really inspired me towards homesteading and holistic living as a lifestyle was really through my own health journey. And when I was in my early 20s, I went through some hormonal health issues and I ended up being diagnosed with PCOS, which is actually pretty common. I think it's like 1 in 6 women have PCOS. There's no cure for PCOS. And really, the main solution that Western medicine offers is birth control, which is really a band-aid at best, unfortunately. And at the time, I was in my early 20s, I was in college. That's really a time where you feel like you should be thriving. And I felt like I was struggling and really asking God, why me? Why am I going through this? And I didn't know much about holistic health. I really hadn't dove into that at all at that point. I was very much raised in and trusted Western medicine, but it just really didn't sit well with me to know that I was going to be taking a medication indefinitely that was just masking the symptoms and not actually healing my body.
Yeah.
And so I started this journey of asking God to start healing my body. And it was a process, it wasn't overnight, but slowly and surely he did. And I started eating whole foods and cutting out processed foods. And that's really where homesteading came in. I started eating more quality food that I was making myself. I was making my own bread. I started a garden. I started growing organic food for myself. I started cutting out, all the artificial junk out of my diet, really looking at my skincare and my beauty products. But I think one of the biggest ways that God has provided healing for me in this journey is when I embraced more simple, intentional living with homesteading, saying no to hustling, rushing, doing everything. And I know for me personally that reducing stress has had such a big impact on my hormonal health. And I think a lot of women probably experience the same, that stress is such a burden on our bodies. And after kind of going through this transition of, no, I need to slow down. I need to really focus on eating well and taking care of myself and embracing little moments versus trying to do everything and rushing from one thing to the next. And really looking back, I think my health is better now than it probably was in my teens and my early 20s. And the lifestyle changes that I've been able to make through homesteading have completely changed what the trajectory of my health is. And I think going forward in the future, I'm excited to think about my family as well, that the things that I've learned and grown in can impact my kids. How awesome is it that they get to grow up in that and experience that intentional living and the
Mm-hmm.
slower pace and the reduced stress. And I think especially kids these days face so much stress just bouncing from one thing to another. And that's really my motivation behind doing the work that I do, cooking from scratch, growing my own food, being intentional about slowing down, even when sometimes it's very much against culture.
Yeah.
To make a point that, I'm just going to say no to things and I'm going to slow down because that's what I need to do. And now being able to take all that and teaching it to others, that is what really inspired me to start a podcast and a blog and to help other women start their homesteading journeys to achieve better health for themselves and for their families. And a bigger part of that too is being able to do it in a way that still feels manageable and sustainable. Because I think with homesteading, it can be so overwhelming that sometimes it defeats the point. It can add stress to your life if you're going about it in the wrong way and pushing too hard and trying to do too much too soon. So finding a way to do homesteading in a way that's manageable for your family.
Yeah. Great. That is all such amazing information. I mean, it was good information for us to take in, but also a cool story as to where God led you from a challenge, a health problem, and just led you along the journey and pointed you in the right direction. And you followed his lead and you took it back to food, which he created, and these whole foods that he created, and used them as medicine for your challenge. So I love that. That speaks to all of our hearts here, especially mine. It's very similar to my story, which you'll hear about. I'm going to be on her show. And so you'll hear all about my story as how it is very similar. But okay, there are so many questions that have stemmed from just hearing all that. So where I want to start is I love how homesteading in my mind, it is about the home. It like when I think of it, I'm like, it's all about family and how you're raising these kids, and you and your husband yourself are creating an environment that is very natural, safe, simple, to use your word, and peaceful. And but that's like the ideal, right? Like that's what we want. And we all want that, whether we are living in a homestead or we're living on a farm or we're living in the city. We all want those things. And so it's kind of like has my wheel spinning, like how can we tap into some of the basics of homesteading, even in our different environments of like not being on a farm, but those things, those virtues of it, of what I just listed, like how can we tap into that? Because it is interesting. Homesteading is a definite branch off of holistic living, which is what we talk about here. But we have not talked about it yet because we're more, and I don't know if we ever would unless a guest comes on like yourself, but we're more focused on, like you said, reducing the stress and leaning into our holistic, spiritual, emotional, mental side. And that comes in a lot of ways. And one way could be homesteading. And one way could be tapping into that as a lifestyle to reduce your stress, to um, really engage with your holistic person and your children and your husband, and how you all can come together as a unit and create this environment that is simple and peaceful and natural. And so, love all that. So, tell me just what does homesteading mean to you, I guess? Like, what is the basics of homesteading to you as it fits in the holistic health living world? Um, and I see it as a branch, like I just told you, but what do you see it as?
Yeah, so I definitely think homesteading is about slowing down, like I said before, being more intentional with your time. And also, I do think a big aspect of it is producing your own food in some capacity,
Mm,
whether it's baking your own bread, whether it's growing your own vegetables, maybe you decide you want to get chickens, um, some aspect of your producing some of your own food at home. I think that is a key part of homesteading. However, I think social media really paints a picture that homesteading is a very specific image and it has to fit this
mm.
certain box. And I really don't think that's true. I think you can homestead no matter where you live. If you live in an apartment, if you live in the country, if you live in the suburbs, I think there's something that everyone can take away from that. Whether it's you decide you're going to bake bread and that's your thing, or if you want to have a little backyard garden or a couple tomato plants outside, or just something that can kind of get you connected. But it doesn't have to be this, you grow all your own food and you have chickens and milk goats and all the things like sometimes we see on social media. It's not an
So
all or
I,
nothing.
yeah, so I can literally just make sourdough and consider leaning into that homesteading environment a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the definition has gotten pretty loose as far as, what you can consider homesteading or not, but I think who cares if you call yourself a homesteader or not? If you want to make sourdough, that's great. And I think there's so many things that you don't necessarily have to do, all the homestead things to get some of the benefits.
Mm,
When we talk about like the mental, spiritual benefits that homesteading can offer.
yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I have a listener. I'm sure there's plenty out there right now listening that has dreams, intentions of homesteading. Maybe they've thought about it a lot. It's just in their heart, and they're like looking at their surroundings, they're looking at their life, and they're like, it seems too hard, too overwhelming. I don't know where to get started. They're looking at those Instagram pictures and those yeah, those homesteaders there. And they're feeling like, I want to get started. It sounds such a great thing, but it seems very complicated. Can you give us a few first simple steps that we would take as a busy mom who really does have intentions of doing this?
Yeah. So it can definitely be overwhelming when you're first getting started, when you're first dreaming about your homestead. And I think, like I said, social media does a really good job of painting a picture of what a homestead is. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming that, you're never going to get to that point. But what I do really emphasize on my podcast is just taking baby steps, just doing one thing at a time. And I think there is a natural progression of baby steps that you can follow if you are wanting to kind of build your own homestead. And the first thing that I always tell people is starting in your kitchen, because that's one that you can do literally wherever you are. If you're in an apartment, wherever. And learning to cook from scratch is really the backbone of homesteading, because if you think about it, some of the other aspects really aren't that useful if you're not comfortable in your kitchen. For example, you can have a huge garden and grow a ton of tomatoes, but that's not really that helpful if you don't know what to do with the tomatoes once you grow them. So it's a good place to start to just get comfortable and just start with easy things, things that you might currently be buying at the store, and you can start experimenting and making yourself. Things like sauces or salad dressings or broth or bread products. I know that's an intimidating one to people to start baking their own bread, but that can actually be a really satisfying thing and save you a lot of money in the process too. But looking
Yeah.
at processed foods that your family buys and just challenge yourself. to switch to making one thing from scratch. Don't worry about, oh, I have to start making everything from scratch. Just pick one thing. And then once you feel like, okay, yeah, I did that. I baked bread. Like I feel really good about that. Then maybe pick one more thing and kind of build from there. And the other
Yeah.
thing I would recommend too, along with, kind of getting familiar in your kitchen, is starting a small backyard garden. And I say small because most people, they're like, yes, I'm going to start a garden, and they just get carried away and they plant all these things and it gets really overwhelming really fast. So I typically say just pick 4 things to grow that first year. Don't plant a ton, just plant enough that you can kind of play around with it and eat things fresh and enjoy it and have the experience for your kids. And really, you can use the farmer's market to fill in the gaps. You don't have to feel like you have to grow everything yourself. There'll be other opportunities out there. There'll be other years to grow more if you want to do that. But just picking those few things that you can start small with, starting small in your kitchen and picking a few things to start from scratch, and planning maybe just a really small backyard garden. Don't go crazy. Just dig up a little spot in your backyard, plant some things, see what happens, and just kind of get started and be willing to have fun with it and not stress out that, it's not going to turn out exactly like you wished it would have.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like this is a little, um, I don't know, risky to speak out loud, but I have not even made my own bread yet. And my listeners are probably like, really? You have a holistic mom show. Um, but I haven't because like I've said, I've not even started anything that has to do with homesteading. And you said food is a key part. So I have not started there. But my sister went to Italy, was that last year, and came home and was all about making things from scratch. And it had to do with that environment. Like you're eating all that fresh food, and it was delicious and healthy for them. They felt so good just being there for 2 weeks and having that kind of food for 2 weeks consistently. They were hooked. And so she they were recently visiting, and we did make, homemade lasagna, made everything from scratch, made homemade bread, all the things. So I have the bug and I definitely want to start doing it. So you just gave us a challenge, which I love challenges. You just gave us a challenge to start with bread and just start one thing. So I'm going to do that. And I'm committing to you listeners to join me. And I'm committing to you that I'm going to do it. And I'm going to put it in the Facebook group. So I will look out for that. I will put a little alert that I'm starting my bread process making, and you can join me. And we're going to get started. Like you said, it's a baby step, and it's a really great one because, I mean, homemade bread, there's might not be anything better, tastier, in my opinion. Okay. So you said the kitchen, and I love that because, like you said, we all have a kitchen, hopefully. And how can we get our kids involved? I know you have really little ones, but how can we get whatever age kids involved in the kitchen in this process of starting making our own food? And like, what can they help with that's really easy for them? Because right now it all seems complicated to us. So how can we make it easy for them? And what are some good things they can help us make?
Yeah. So I think, whatever you're making, just giving them little jobs along the way. And if your kids are older, maybe even having them help pick recipes or things like that, like have them be inspired for
Hmm.
what they want to make. I think that's a big motivator. But as far as littles, which is mostly what I know, yeah, just in the steps of what you're making, have them kind of help along the way. So, for example, my older daughter that's 3, she's a really good dumper when I measure things. That is her job, and she is great at it. And also, bread is really satisfying for little kids. Like if I'm making buns or even if I'm making a loaf, I'll just pinch off a little piece and I'll let her work that dough and shape it right along with me. And, we'll plop it on the pan when she's done and we'll bake it. And sometimes it looks like a blob, but, she thinks it's the best thing in the world because she made it. And
Yeah.
really, you can't ruin fresh bread. It's still good either way.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I agree. Yes. That is so fun because that is something any age can do is they love playing with dough. I mean, I think I've been to an Italian restaurant before where they just give balls of dough to the kids as like they're waiting for the food to come out. And it's so fun. You just sit there and play with fresh dough.
Oh, that's so
So
cool.
so yeah, that's a great way to start and something I'll do with my kids. That's awesome. Okay. We know that through your testimony that God led you basically to homesteading, holistic living, definitely, and then helped you learn about food and what you're putting in your body to help your hormones and your health in general. And so this is the story that he's writing inside of you. But can you give more specifics on what you have learned about God through the process or just in homesteading, or maybe it's in gardening or farming? There's so many things you could learn, but give us some good nuggets of things that you've learned about God.
Yeah. So, like I said, I do think there is a really amazing spiritual aspect to homesteading that, you get to be connected to and you get to admire his creation. But really, the more that I embrace homesteading, the more that I realize how the benefits that we can receive through homesteading line up with how God designed our bodies. So, like I said, for example, creation, he wants us to admire his creation and to spend time in it and to care for it. And that has a positive impact on our bodies when we do that. And he wants us to work hard and to use our physical bodies. I think he wants us to slow down and leave room for the Holy Spirit to work in us while we're going about those tasks. And that is one thing that I've noticed is when I'm doing some of these daily routine things, like when I'm pulling weeds in my garden or picking green beans or kneading my bread or chopping vegetables, those are some of my best moments that I get to connect with God because I'm doing these tasks that are somewhat mindless. And it just allows my mind to be open to what God has to say to me in that moment. And when I kind of switch to more of this lifestyle versus, being super busy, working a full-time job, not saying that, you can't be intentional working a full-time job. You definitely can. Um, but rushing from one activity to the other, you don't allow yourself to have those same quiet moments where you can connect with God when you're taking those intentional pockets of time. And I think that aspect has been the biggest way that God has worked in my life is just allowing those quiet moments to be able to connect with him.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And maybe God's speaking to me because I just talked to a friend yesterday and she said, I hear God's voice best when I'm gardening. And so I'm like, oh, do I need to start gardening? No, I would love to, but um, yeah, I think I had to start in my kitchen because my yard is really not set up for a garden. So I would have to work on that. It's complicated and it's overwhelming. So I'm not going to start with that. Does not seem simple, but I love that I've heard this before too, that love is slow. And Jesus, if we look at Jesus's life, which he's our example, and he walked everywhere. He did not run from place to place. He wasn't definitely not driving a car and zooming through life. He was walking at a slower pace than we walk at. And he was allowing people to interact with him along the journey because he was slow and intentional with his steps. And that is an example for us that we're supposed to take, but we really ignore that. And we just succumb to our culture, which is super high pace and fast paced. So I love that. And I think that's so good that, you know, all God really, not all he wants to do, but he really wants to communicate with us. And when we're going so fast, it's hard to listen. And this is something I really talk about a lot on my show is that we have to spend that time with him and make it a point. And it's hard in a you know, jam-packed schedule to find that time. It has to be early morning or late at night or in your dreams, because that's the only time you are still and quiet. And, God wants to talk to us a lot more than that. And so I love that you're saying throughout the day, you have these quiet moments and you're using it basically time to pray. And um, that's really cool and definitely a way to encourage us to homestead and just like to have that simple life, a little bit more simple. But what do you do when, you have the temptations? I mean, your kids are still little, but I'm sure you have other mom friends and I don't know, people that that homestead with different ages. And what do you do when the temptations come to, let's do this activity and let's get our kids involved in this and this sport? And even at church, we can get really busy with commitments and responsibilities and serving and all the Bible studies. Like, how do you say no to the busy life?
Yeah, it is really challenging. And I think it takes an actual commitment to your spouse or to yourself, and you have to be able to communicate that with your spouse. So whenever something comes up, if we're thinking about, oh, maybe, our daughter should do this activity, or maybe I should take on this responsibility at church, we'll ask each other. And we kind of have that accountability with each other of, no, that's going to be too much for our family, or, maybe we can make that work, or really what that's going to look like or how it's going to affect our schedule. But we kind of just have this underlying understanding of, we're not going to run ourselves ragged. We're not going to book something every night of the week. And we guard ourselves to prevent that from happening. And sometimes it is challenging and it's hard to say no sometimes. We've both had to say no to opportunities at church that are good opportunities. We're both very involved in our church and we do a lot of volunteering. And sometimes, when you are one of the more active members in your church, the more responsibilities that kind of tend to get pushed on you. But yeah, there have been times where we've had to say no to good things, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, we kind of know what that limit is for ourselves and our family, that we just have to have that boundary for our own physical and mental health. And I think that's more God honoring than running yourself ragged. Because if you're running yourself ragged, even if it's for ministry, your mind, and your spirit really isn't in the right intentions in that ministry anyway. You're not really connecting with God how you should if you're wearing yourself down that much anyway. But it is hard. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I love my listeners to hear is that even these good things that fill our schedule, they might not be for us because they're not serving our whole person. They, like you said, can put a weight on our mind. And that is super important. If we're anxious and stressed, then we are not being present in other areas and we're not serving our bodies in other areas. And we don't always see that. And so it's really important to ask God everything that comes across our desk. God, is this for me right now? Is this for me in this season? Is this for our family? Is this for this child? And listening to what he says, even when it's hard and you really want to do it. Yeah, I love that we can really tap into our holistic life by saying no and slowing down and taking things more simple and, really looking at our home as an extension of us and not just, even like extending it. Like our holistic person is there. We have all our wellness areas and then our home that is actually our environmental wellness, that's our social wellness, and it's included. And what you're saying is that really is a really good way to tap into your holistic life. Your holistic living is to homestead and look at that as maybe a way that God wants you to, conduct your lifestyle and to make this lifestyle change. So really cool. And I'm really sure that if this has been on the hearts and minds of our listeners, that they're like excited that they now have some tools to get started in really basic ways. And I know you have some amazing episodes on your podcast about some ways they can get started very literally. Can you share where they can find you and where they can tap in to your content?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can listen to the podcast, which is the Farm Family Table. And I put out weekly content and it's all geared towards beginner homesteading. I know sometimes, we see things online or on social media, and there's a little bit of a gap for those of us who are just starting with homesteading. So I really break it down and bring it to a simple level that feels, manageable, not overwhelming. I give lots of practical application. And I give a lot of encouragement as well, and especially biblical encouragement. That's one thing that I really see lacking in the homesteading community is people just forget about God and how important it is to tie him into homesteading and what we're doing. So I really try to incorporate that into every episode. I make it my goal that you walk away encouraged, not overwhelmed, that you need to do another thing or learn another thing or be better at something. So hopefully your listeners can find that inspiring. And you can also check out our website, which is farmfedfamily.com. So I put out recipes and gardening tips, and I have a freebie library. So your listeners could check that out as well and get some really helpful homesteading resources on that.
Thank you so much. And yes, like I said, I took a peek at your podcast. I listened to a few little snippets, and you definitely break it down really simply. And I love it. And I'm getting started with bread making. You have a few episodes on that. I'm going to be listening and applying. So I encourage you as a listener to start with me. Again, I'm going to put that in our Facebook group, Holistic Living for Christian Moms. Yeah, all your resources sound like someone can find anything they need. If they don't want to get started with bread, but something else, it's there. So thank you so much for sharing that. And this has been such a pleasure. You have opened my eyes to and my mind to more things about homesteading that I did not think before. So it has been awesome to learn and to learn about you. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, Wellness Warrior. I pray that blessed you. And if so, it would bless me big if you would write a 5-star review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Not only would this make me super happy, but it will allow for others to find this show too. Also, I love to chat over on Instagram, so make sure to take a screenshot, share to your Instagram stories, and tag me at @TheShanWright so I can see it and we can keep chatting and bring other moms to chat with us. Until we get to chat again, mama friend, may the Lord's face shine upon you and give you peace.